There are several people who are said to be the founding fathers of artificial intelligence, and that's the reason why no woman has come forth and claimed to be the mother of artificial intelligence. So I want to talk about ideas that are precursors to the World Wide Web, about the current situation and how it compares with predictions of what would happen. I have to say that the predictions in question are almost all my predictions, the reason because that's what I'm familiar with. Okay, I would say the first major idea, or a major idea, we could go back further than that, is Turing's 1936 idea of the universal computer. And what universal means is that with a universal computer you can compute anything that any computer can compute by simulating this other computer. And that was a somewhat surprising result, I think, at the time. But it's a consequence. As a consequence of that, no computer manufacturer has ever claimed that his computer could compute something that other computers could not compute. So we've been at least saved that complaint. I should remark that before the universal computers, when you had the kind of desk calculator that you would press buttons on, it was true that some of them could compute things that others could not. Like the basic models could only add and multiply, and it was an additional step to be able to divide. Okay, so that's Turing. Now, the first computer that was actually built was built by Maurice Wilkes at Cambridge in England, and he called it the EDSAC. And John von Neumann and Eckert and Mauchly, their lawsuits about who did what, in 1946, discussed the stored program computer. So what stored program computer meant is that the program of the computer was in the same memory as the data. And computers that had been built before that, like the Harvard Mark I, did not have that characteristic. And the ENIAC did not have that characteristic. And it was thought at the time that it was fundamental that a program could change itself. This has become less important. Now, another important idea was proposed by Vannevar Bush, an American engineer and scientific administrator, and he proposed in an article something called the MEMEX, which would be an information station. And I won't go into the details of it because I don't remember them, but it doesn't mention universality, so he probably wasn't aware of Turing. The first person to really discuss artificial intelligence, although he didn't call it that, was Turing, and he gave a lecture to the London Mathematical Society in 1947. And now, in the 70s, applications that people would pay money for came up, which is, in some respects, a distraction from pursuing the science. At least it has become such a distraction in the 90s. And sometime, maybe in this century, we will reach human-level artificial intelligence. But nobody has any plan that anybody else would believe is only a matter of applying money, and then you would reach human-level artificial intelligence. I get email once a week about someone who has such a plan. Now in 1958, I proposed formalizing common sense. That is, being able to write common sense in languages of mathematical logic, common sense knowledge, and to do common sense inference by some kind of logical inference. Now, the interesting thing about that is that this was an objective of Leibniz around 1700. It was an objective of Boole. He entitled his book The Laws of Thought. It was an objective of Frege. But when mathematical logic was developed, it proved that you could formalize mathematics in it, but the idea of formalizing, or the techniques for formalizing common sense, have been developed only slowly. Now, one of my ideas was, I thought that, well, it would be really nice if I could sit at a computer terminal and talk to an artificially intelligent program and tell it things and interact with it, and it would take my advice and so forth. And computers were so expensive at that time that it seemed to me the only possible way of doing it was by time sharing, so that while I was scratching my head, it would be doing things for somebody else. So that technology was proposed in '59 and realized in a first system in 1962 by actually several people. J.C.R. Licklider was a psychologist in 1960, wrote an article called Man-Machine Symbiosis, which has had a lot of influence in popularizing, both among scientists and among the general public, the idea of interaction of humans and computers. Larry Roberts, who as an executive at DARPA, proposed and implemented the ARPANET, which evolved through a succession of political maneuvers into the internet that we have today. An important technical device was by Douglas Engelbart, was the mouse, and which I was very skeptical about at the time, but I actually use it, although I use the IBM pointer stick on this computer. And the other idea that he promoted was linked documents. Alan Kay in 1970 proposed something called the Dynabook, which physically would have been like this laptop here, maybe a little bit smaller, but he imagined it to have much more access to information than you can get over the internet. Another major step was Tim Berners-Lee, who in the late 1980s and early 90s developed the World Wide Web. And then since that time has pursued a number of ideas that I regard as mistaken. But anyway, that was a very important thing, which developed enormously quickly. The reason was that it was built on top of existing tools, but the existing tools were not very usable as they stood, the file transfer protocol and so forth. And he made it so that people could really use it and could link documents together and so forth. And there were search engines before Google, but I think Sergey Brin and Larry Page really made the whole thing usable. In the previous search engines, you would search for something and you would give up before you got it, even though it was probably the 375th item if you had had only the patience to look that far. And Google is pretty good about about producing things that are useful to you relatively soon. I still find sometimes that it doesn't get what I want, but but it's really extremely good. There were other prophets, and I'm neglecting them. Nelson, I'm even forgetting his first name, but anyway. Okay. Now, I want to put in some early predictions, and some of them worked out and others didn't, and some are working sort of and have further to go. Well, one of the first ones that I predicted and developed, well, I didn't develop it, but developing time-sharing made it possible, and the idea was that you would have a time-shared public utility, so you would have some kind of terminal at home, initially a typewriter, later, of course, a display terminal, and you would be a client of this public utility service. And there were a number of time-sharing companies formed. They were not very successful. They had to charge too much, was the basic problem, and they spent close to 90% of their expenses on hand-holding the customers. Now, time-sharing and utilities worked fine in computer labs, and basically everyone adopted them. Now, one of the things that we did at Stanford in the Artificial Intelligence Lab in 1972 was to make a news service based on the Associated Press wire, which they let us use for the student newspaper price of $15 a month. And so we had it in the lab, and DARPA liked it as a demonstration, but needless to say, the AP was not in favor of our making their thing generally available. So that lasted from 1972 to 1989, when we switched computers and didn't redo the program, and anyway, AP was getting very nervous. The New York Times had cut us off long ago. Okay, now one of the things that was predicted, or that proposed, I would say, was access to all the world's books. And in 1972, I got to see the president's science advisor and suggested that the U.S. use $2.5 billion in blocked Indian rupees to get the Indians to type in the Library of Congress. He said he had no power, and anyway, Nixon fired him in a couple of months later. Not for that, I hope. Now, still, there are some books available. John Ockerbloom at the University of Pennsylvania has links to more than 20,000 free-to-read books, and anything that whose copyright expired by 1920 and is of importance so that some English department or something like that will get it into the computer. There are lots of things available. Jane Austen is all available. Shakespeare is all available. A good part of Kipling is available, and so forth. English literature. I don't know whether anybody's done that in other languages. Okay, online buying and selling, and I don't think anyone predicted eBay in 1970. So there were some things that were not predicted. Well, access to all the world's books hasn't happened because of the lack of an economic model, which makes sure that the writers and the publishers will be rewarded. Now, my opinion is that the writers should be rewarded, and the publishers should suffer a substantial degree of technological unemployment, but that may actually be mistaken. We got a brochure in which Elsevier explained why commercial scientific publishers were very important because they are suffering a lot of stress from the development of online scientific journals. The key thing that works for science and doesn't work for literature is that science is produced by projects, and the page charges that the online journals charge are a small part of the cost of doing the research. Therefore, it's reasonable to say that the author pays, with exceptions for authors that don't have institutional support. And the biologists have pioneered that. Okay, now as to online use of computers, how many people here have never seen a punched card? I guess that punched cards have lasted longer in this in this country than elsewhere. Now, the best time-sharing system in terms of operation was the Digital Equipment Corporation series of the PDP-6, PDP-10, DEC System 10, DEC System 20, and so forth. And they never made really powerful machines in that series because they were afraid of IBM, or at least that's what some of their people told me. Now, as to personal computers, MIT developed the TX2, MIT Lincoln Lab, around 1960 with a lot of nice facilities. It was a personal computer, but it was $500,000. So only one was ever built. Later on, in 1975, the first Sun was a good personal computer, but it was only a mere $20,000. Now, the IBM PC was too weak initially, but and was designed as a single-user computer, and it didn't even time-share processes like printing with the user's computing, and that was an add-on. And first of all, it was done badly because of having fixed allocations of space and so forth, various bad ideas. But many of the weaknesses of the early PCs have been kept in much stronger computers. The PC hell is system administration, that is installing programs and so forth. And you need artificial intelligence to do it properly on a mass scale. You were looking at your watch. When should I stop?
I should correct him. He should have a look at the watch in front of you, so don't ignore him.
Well, I'd like to know. Okay, well, these are sort of just general grumbles. Operating systems require the user to do system administration for every new version. I just had the disk replaced on a Macintosh, and that was a disaster that I have not yet fully recovered from. Namely, nothing is where I left it. even though the disk hadn't actually crashed, so that they were able to copy this stuff. But nevertheless, we fix Macs. Didn't fix it enough for me. Now, one thing which sort of goes back to the time-sharing idea is the so-called set-top box, where you would use a TV as a display and so forth. And that seems to be an idea of 5 years ago that seems to have dropped out. And the reason may have been that it was the people who were offering it were aiming at monopoly of services. But in general, too little and too late. One would much rather have a laptop or other PC and not have one's hand held by, I forget the company that was doing that, Adobe maybe, or not Adobe. Okay, the present web is pretty good. The users will do okay even without new ideas. In my opinion, there's a shortage of good new ideas. And that a lot of the flashy claims that one sees, both on the part of the companies themselves, but on the part of people who comment, are not good ideas. And my own view of the dot-com crash was that there were just too many bad or trivial ideas. Now, everyone has trouble using something new. And no matter how much experience you have of using some things, other things are going to come up for which you are a beginner. And you will have typical beginner's troubles. And my opinion on this is that a major development that's required is for the systems to understand the user's confusion. How is he confused? And I've got a trivial example. A user is asked for an IP address, and he types a URL. Or an email address. And a present program that is expecting an IP address will say, sorry, that's not the right format. A smarter program would say, oh, you've just given an email address. That's not the same as an IP address. If you want to know, if it isn't just a slip on your part, I'll tell you the difference. And that's the way a human who was looking over your shoulder and was experienced with computers would do it, and the computers themselves have to do it. But I say that's a trivial example because states of confusion are often vastly more complicated than that. Okay, and now here's where I'm disagreeing with some people, that there are a fad for emotional computing, for sympathetic computing, and so forth. And I just have this picture in mind of somebody sitting at your elbow who's supposed to help you, but understands absolutely nothing about how you are confused, and pats you on the shoulder and says, I feel your pain, and so forth. I think it will only produce annoyance. It really has to have some understanding of what you need to know. Okay, now I'm going to go back to an ancient paper of mine, 1970, in which I predicted the world of the future. And what I have is a bunch of quotes from it, interspersed in blue by more up-to-date comments on what worked and what didn't. So one of the things that I said in 1970 is of what a newspaper or a book is, a package produced by a large organization. And I thought that physical production would disappear, allowing much smaller organization to put out the same packages of text and pictures. That hasn't really happened yet. One of the things that I underestimated, see, Life and Look were American publications at the time I wrote this thing. People will be able to get anything they want, and will be able to get individual, there will be individual competition. And that hasn't quite worked out, and I think not merely for technological reasons. So I underestimated the resistance to being displaced these organizations would be able to mount. Even the publication organization of nonprofit scientific societies have been able to resist displacement, like American Physical Society and so forth. ACM, AAAI has. Once you've created a bureaucracy, then it's going to maintain itself. So the biologists have taken the lead in creating online journals, page where things work. Now, the blogs come closest to my predictions, but they still can't afford famous professional writers who are often very good and much better than the less famous ones. So one of the things that came out in the last American election campaign is that some of the political bloggers were actually able to make money by advertisements. And that fits in with my 1970 model of the world of the future, whereby an individual could compete with the large organizations, at least find a place among the large organizations. And we'll see how that develops, since the commentators didn't remark on it until just after the last American election. So what's a publication? It's put out a list of material that it recommends to its readers, and it has a financial arrangement with them. And there can be a variety of publications. Now, in 1970, I ignored the copying problem. I didn't think about that. It's turned out to be very serious. I don't know quite what the situation, what the solution is. I think that Richard Stallman, who has been a hero in many respects, has been a negative force in his view that everything should be free and no one should have to pay for anything, unless Stallman would think of a mechanism where my daughter, who is a professional writer, would still be able to make money. I said he's had some negative effects. One of the things that probably hasn't got too much to do with computers, it has to do with the phenomenon of stars. Now, you have movie stars, you have sports stars, you have writers who are stars, and so forth. And what's increasingly happening with the most publicity in sports, where some young person who is one of the world's most talented person at this particular activity can immediately make hundreds of millions of dollars. And why should that be so? And it's so because for the people who hire people like that, the best guy is a lot better than the second best, or at least it's worth a lot more money to have the best guy. And my opinion is that this will continue and get more prominent in the future, because while the population will increase, say the UN predicts 9 billion by the middle of this century as opposed to 6 billion now, what will really happen is increased equality of opportunity. In other words, when the market includes 1.2 billion Chinese and 1 billion Indians, as added to the American and European markets, then there will be an increased opportunity for stars, and they will make vastly more money than they do today. I don't know that that's, I think society will survive that. Even if, certainly society has survived Bill Gates being so rich. Okay, so a reader will be able to get help. And my opinion is that the facilities for providing help, which after all have always existed in the form of book reviews and publications, have not improved to the extent to which is possible. At least I'm often finding out at random something that I want. I asked Herbert Simon once complained to me. He said, we're drowning in this glut of information. Now, people have been complaining about that since the year 1700, when, or maybe 1600, when printing made possible more books than anybody could possibly read. And so I asked him, well, has it ever happened that you saw a publication that if only you'd seen it 10 years earlier would have greatly affected your work? And he said no. And I asked him, well, why not? And he said, because people tell me what I should read. Well, there were people to tell him what to read. I wouldn't say that that's that I would make quite the same claim. Now, I was hoping advertising would mainly go away, and that was didn't happen. And perhaps fortunately, at least advertising supports the production of a lot of worthwhile material. Although I don't understand it in one sense. I almost never buy anything on the basis of seeing it advertised. At least I don't think I do. Somebody could say, well, no, you bought this, and surely, and it was caused by the repetition of the name. But since I don't watch TV, I'm not that affected. Now, another thing that I predicted was that there would be frequent revisions of articles and books. An author can take into account new facts or other people's criticism, and the revision would take effect immediately. There's been a little bit of that. I frequently revise the web versions of old papers, or put dated footnotes in it, but it certainly hasn't happened very much. Now, here was something, public controversy could be carried out more expeditiously. If you read something that seems controversial, you can ask if anybody's filed a reply. And I was hoping that this, together with an author's ability to revise the original statement, would lead people to converge on considered positions more quickly than at present, even if they do not come to actual agreement. And maybe that's happened a little bit. I'm still sort of hopeful for the future, but I didn't see it happening in this philosophy meeting. Well, to set up formally discussions of some controversial, if you can find some issue where there are yes or no sides, then the yes and no's might hit on considered positions as best they can by iteration. So I'm not going to do it, but you should do it. Okay, now here in 2000, I was suggesting that there would be truth squads with putting on websites. And now what happened in 2004 is that they did more of that. And so in the U.S., and maybe in 2008, they'll do a lot more. Then I said famous authors will not need publishers because the readers will have the system find their stuff automatically. Remember, I was thinking about time-sharing systems rather than the internet, but Google will find you stuff. But now, what was the author who tried that, who put a book up on the web for Stephen King or something? Yeah, anyway, for him it was a disaster because the thing was just repeatedly copied and he hardly got paid for it at all. So, got to think of some other mechanism. Now, again, this was the question of revision, and the bloggers, it seems to me, just bombard their opponents with new things rather than revising their previous opinions. Okay, now one of the things that really has happened is online ordering and online announcement of products and so forth. That's certainly happened to a great extent. Somehow I imagine it'd be more revolutionary than it did, but anyway, it has happened. So making airplane or hotel reservations by interacting with programs has certainly worked out quite fine, and I don't know when it became possible. Let's remember the paper predicted it in 1970, and it came about maybe around 85 or 90 or something like that you could do that. Now here's another one that hasn't happened, individual design and construction services, where the extreme example is I'd like a car to my specs that has the features that I wanted, and not merely a collection of options and things like that. And there's nobody who will design a car to my specifications and then have it automatically produced on the same production line as producing other cars with other designs. So cars would be an extreme, but anyway, it hasn't happened. Computer programs, no, there's certainly a fair competition in that. And even if I do find it too confusing and haven't really mastered downloading, but my son has mastered it very well and does it for me. By the way, I should mention, why is it that my son does it so much better than I do? And my feeling is that you learn your first thing that you do very well, and then subsequent things less well. So that if you really wanted to know how to write a program in symbolic assembly language for the IBM 704, I could really advise you, or the DEC PDP-1. But except for certain sentimentalists who actually have simulators for those ancient computers, nobody does that. So my 1970 article did not see AI as essential as I see it now to help people use computers. So I was working on AI then, but it was in my mind a separate topic. So this slide is not very good because I should have put a lot more in it, but the truth is that I didn't have a lot more ideas here. So you want a swindle predictor. Now, it's amusing to be able to identify all possible variants of the Nigerian scam, which has involved a lot of creativity, but still they can be detected and deleted easily enough. So anyway, I don't have know how to make a program that knows about swindles in general. Swindles from respectable sources are sort of interesting. I get a lot of bombardment from United Airlines, and some of it seems to me pretty close to being swindles. So here's more about IP addresses and URLs, but I don't think it says anything much different than I said in elaboration of what I said before. System administration requires knowledge and reasoning, and my evidence for that is that the people who spend several hours fixing my problems always obviously think a lot, because I feel ashamed sometimes that I can't fix this thing myself. And so I get an expert to do it for me, and the expert takes 3 hours. And that makes me pleased that I asked him rather than trying to do, because it would probably taken me 20 hours. What? I just think I should quit pretty quick. Okay, I will. So I think I'll skip this part about logical AI. It's what I think is necessary for human-level AI, but I won't. But he's rattled me. So some facts is that humans mainly communicate in facts, not in rules or programs, and people reason to get new facts from old. And that next point is a technical one. And okay, future of the web, part 2. That should be part 1. Programs that understand substantial parts of natural language document, facts about the world, facts about people's states of mind, including confused states of mind. I keep pushing the button, there aren't any more slides.
I think this is. Professor John McCarthy, once Turing recipient, yes. At that time that he received the Turing Award, he was so busy that he said, I could only deliver a talk, but I have no time to write it down. And only after 10 years he wrote down. And in the introduction of the story he wrote down, he said, now I set my mind back to 10 years ago, and I will write down what I thought at that time, and then I give some notes what I think now. And that was the beginning of what you saw, because he continued this habit to give notes now and then on his thoughts. And so we got this afternoon an excellent insight in what this scientist, I would say one of the best scientists we have produced over the last 30 years. I think that some of you did not completely understand the depth of his thoughts, because he said it a little bit, but I will tell you, if you are 80 and you have such a productive period behind you, you have taken notes over that whole period, it is absolutely excellent. And so one more applause for this scientist. Some people who know me are, some of them, very few, and sometimes I'm reproached for that, are a little bit afraid for me. Because in my students' environment, I sometimes give questions which people are obliged to pose. And also in this environment, I have one person who will give I the task to have a question, and that's Arjan Sevenster. Now I give questions. I give the floor to people who would like to have 2 informative questions, and then we start the panel. Who could I give the microphone to have a question? Yes, over there.
You mentioned common sense reasoning. What has become of that?
Sorry?
You mentioned common sense reasoning.
Yes?
In the beginning of your talk. What has become of that now?
What is what?
What is, how good is a computer at this moment in common sense reasoning? What is the performance of a computer now?
Okay. Some aspects of common sense knowledge and reasoning are understood, and the parts that are understood, you can write computers to do them, computer programs to do them, or use general purpose reasoning systems. Others are not understood. Let me give an example which is not understood well. Game of chess, as we know, computer programs have been written that can beat the world champion with the aid of enormously fast hardware. But in the game of Go, the very best computers, in spite of very substantial effort, are far behind human performance. And the reason is that there's an intellectual mechanism used in Go which is not required for chess. And that is to be able to take the overall situation, divide it into parts, analyze the parts, and the division depends on what the current situation is. It's not a fixed division into dividing the board into quarters or eighths or something like that. And analyze the parts separately and then analyze their interaction. So that's an area which hasn't been of common sense reasoning, which hasn't been solved yet. But in general, the whole area of common sense reasoning is in quite weak state.
Thank you. So, if you may understand, we are on our way, and if we may believe what John McCarthy states, that is that we will arrive at our goal, and I would say the date of arriving, the arrival time, I would say, is open for the debate later on this afternoon. Second question. Yes?
You mentioned Berners-Lee, that you didn't agree with most of his more recent ideas. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Oh, XML is a loser.